I mean, one thing I like to point out is Trump's been in office. He signed hundreds of executive orders now. The number of miles of trails that have been opened so far, and we're in early February, still zero. The last 4 years, you did have people in power that were very intent on shutting things down. Oh, well, this was done because there was some kind of trail damage or environmental impact or something. And it's like, no, that's not it. That's not it. They don't really have good evidence. What it boiled down to is people who had worked in these radical organizations were now running the agencies of the government. So it really is enacting an agenda more than it is a rational application of administrative policy. And I don't think there was anybody watching them as closely as we were. It's an anti-human religion that just thinks humans are inherently bad. If all you had to do was throw some money at an environmental group in America and that would cut off America from its sources of uranium, that's a smart move. You don't have to fire a single bullet and all of a sudden you've disarmed a country from pretty powerful weapons and from pretty powerful energy sources. And so it's like, this is why I believe the environmental laws will expire. Forget the election even happened. I've been telling people since the summer that the most important litigation work that BRC will do in its history will happen in the next 5 years. We were the only organization doing it at the level we were doing it.
Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this work?
I've grown up in the West, and you just get connected to the lands. I just get a lot of benefit from it. It makes me happy as a person to go out and enjoy these places and see this beautiful earth that we live on. And cool, I think humans have that desire to want to go explore things. My general position is I want you out there too. I don't want it just for me.
Ben Burr, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you, Kyle?
I'm great. This is for those of you that don't know who Ben is. You're the executive director for Blue Ribbon Coalition, are you not?
I am the executive director.
And you're also wearing a Fender t-shirt. We have to talk about this just super quickly. I played guitar for 15 years of my life. Do you play guitar?
Well, why did you quit?
Because I got into dirt bikes.
Oh,
I was a dad and I got into dirt bikes. And so I retired. There's a guitar. If you see that right back that's an acoustic guitar. I mostly played electric.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I do play guitar. I've played it since high school, and it's become my midlife crisis is to go buy cool guitars. So
that is so cool. I didn't know that we had that in common. We're about the same age. I noticed you've got a little bit more gray in your beard than I do. What's up with that?
Oh, I'm now 44. I'm like clearly in the middle of midlife crisis, and my body is agreeing with that development. I'm not in my mind. I'm still a rock star teenager at heart. And so
oh my gosh,
we'll see if the beard change goes along with that.
I'm the same. I'm 43. I'll be 44 in just like 10 seconds, just in a couple months. In May, I turn 44. So I know all about that. But I feel like as long as you're active, you stay active. Age is just a number. That's what they keep saying. So.
Yeah, and I mean, we might be the first generation that lives through maybe the tech bros will figure out how to prolong our lives for a long time, and maybe we'll live a long time. Who knows? We'll see.
All this stuff that's going down with AI and everybody talking about AI. I just have this sneaking suspicion that it might actually, if they get supercomputers crunching on some of this stuff, they could really start prolonging people's lives. I mean, it's like there are certain problems that we haven't been able to solve. I think computers could solve it. Be like, hey, we can add 10 years to your life, 20 years to your life. It could totally happen. You and I might be just a little bit too old to take full advantage of it, but I think our kids and definitely
maybe let's be hopeful. Let's be hopeful. Yeah. We need reverse aging for some of us.
It feels so weird to say my grandkids, but I do believe that by the time I have grandkids, those people will probably be living significantly longer than you and I because they'll be able to take care of us. It's either that or we blow each other up with or
we'll be living. It's like what I think Einstein or one of those people that invented the bomb said that I don't know what weapons nuclear or World War III will be fought with, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and rocks.
Right. They said World War III would be fought nuclear, and then the one after that would be fought with sticks and stones, which is totally.
So let's hope it's not that. Let's hope we go into the post-scarcity future of abundance and we all have good long lives of prosperity and freedom and all of that. That'd be great.
Well,
guitars.
We'll have to chat more about guitars offline. I always enjoy our chats. We had a chat on the phone, maybe what, 3, 4 weeks ago, and you were just talking about all the things that are happening with Blue Ribbon Coalition, and now with this incoming administration, and just it sounds like there's a million things going on right now. With this, but I just wanted to point out, like on Blue Ribbon Coalition, for those of you that don't know, and you're listening to my podcast, if you aren't a member of Blue Ribbon Coalition, you need to solve that right now. It's as low as what, like $5 a month, isn't it?
Yeah, we have a $5 a month membership, or you can join for $50 a year.
Yeah.
And
And the amount of good that happens from that, I can't even describe. I can't tell you. We're going to get into some of the things. We're going to get into a lot of it today. But the only way that this happens is when members of our community, and when I say our community, I'm talking OHV, I'm talking dirt bikers and UTVs and horseback ride, everyone, every single person, once we get involved, because we're fighting this war. It's like we're fighting this nuclear war, and we've got the sticks and stones, and on the other side they've got all the big nukes and they got the Blackhawks and everything. And Blue Ribbon Coalition is the first line of defense, and in many cases the only line of defense. And it's an arms race, and we've been losing it for a long time. But the one thing we do have is like incredibly smart people, and that starts with Blue Ribbon Coalition. They've helped me out in the past on a couple different legal issues, which has been amazing. And they're not fighting for me because I'm Dirt Bike Channel. They're fighting for me because they were First Amendment rights. And rights as like a U.S. citizen on public lands and things. And so I just want everyone to go over there. If you're not a member, it's $5 a month, and yeah, and go support the businesses that are supporting Blue Ribbon too. So,
yeah, we have a lot of business members that support us, a lot of individual members, and with that support, we've been able to get a lot of things done. And you kind of have this mindset that the political winds have shifted. And I mean, the previous administration we had was pretty aggressive in wanting to close down a lot of public lands. I mean, we saw those plans released that was closing hundreds of miles of trails in Moab. It closed the tubes and Dead Cow Loop and some crazy, insanely popular dirt bike trails.
yeah,
And that was just in one area. I mean, I had my policy director run the numbers, and we participated in over 300 actions. The Moab plan was one out of over 300 that affected how 190 million acres of land will be managed, tens of thousands of miles of trails, how those will be managed. And so we've been very engaged on a lot of things. But the political winds have shifted. The administration now, we've had a Trump administration before, so we kind of know what we're going to get. And they were a lot friendlier for recreation access and just kind of keeping public lands open. And so we expect that to be the case this time around. But then it also means sometimes people get complacent and on our side, and they feel like, okay, we don't need to worry about this anymore. And that's something I want to talk to you and your listeners about today, is why we can't do that now. Like, now is the time we've got to double down and be even more aggressive than we have in the past. And we have a plan to do that. And that's what I think we ought to talk a little bit about today. And there's some good things in the works.
yeah, I can see how there would be some apathy that could kind of pop up on our side. But as I think about it, I'm like, the other side didn't do that. The other side got super hyper aggressive when they had certain, an organization in there. It's not like we talk about Biden and we talk about Trump. Those are just like the figureheads. But these administrations are hundreds and hundreds of people, right? And
Yeah.
so they've got all those people in, and then you've got the Sierra Club and these different mega super PAC groups behind them. And the last 4 years, we have kind of been on our heels a little bit, right? And now that
Yeah.
they're shifting a little, it's time for us to try to push back and get some of that ground back. Is that what you're saying?
That is what I'm saying. And I mean, to be clear, it's like we're a nonprofit, so we're not partisan. It's not like, I mean, but the work we do is affected by politics. And so in order to even talk about it in any substantive way, you have to talk about the political context. And the political context is such that the last 4 years, you did have people in power that were very intent on shutting things down. I mean, you had the former director of the Bureau of Land Management. Her name was Tracy Stone Manning. She left the Trump administration, and she's now the executive director of the Wilderness Society.
Mm.
which is the top organization trying to lock up as much land as possible as wilderness. And while she was at the BLM, her top deputy was Nada Culver, who had also been the chief counsel for the Wilderness Society and was also the attorney who signed the settlement agreement that required the BLM to review that Moab travel plan. And so, like, people look at those plans and are like, oh, well, this was done because there was some kind of trail damage or environmental impact or something. And it's like, and I kept trying to tell people, like, no, that's not it. That's not it. We reviewed the administrative record. They don't really have good evidence that any of the justifications for closing those trails added up. What it boiled down to was people who had worked in these radical organizations were now running the agencies of the government. And they proved those decisions. They pushed them through during the last few weeks of the Biden administration. They were signing all kinds of things that were the last ditch efforts to get their agenda accomplished. And so it really is about these political actors enacting an agenda more than it is a rational application of administrative policy. And they're just using that as sort of the shield for doing what they're doing. And so that's all changed now. I mean, those people are no longer employed by the government. They're not making decisions anymore. They've now gone out and are working in nonprofits that'll be working very hard to oppose any efforts to reopen these lands for public use. And so we've put together what we're calling the grand reopening of our public lands because they are under new management now. And if the story of the last management was to close them all down, we want to reopen them and reintroduce them to the American people and get a lot of the things that got closed back open. And we're planning to do that in the court. There's a lot of opportunity in the courts right now through litigation, a lot of opportunity to just educate the incoming administration officials on what got done in the last 4 years because I don't think there was anybody watching them as closely as we were and participating in all of the planning actions and everything they did. We were involved in a massive amount of it. And there's also, because of the shifts that happened in Congress, there are some bills that have been floating around as legislation that we think have a good chance of getting passed if the community rallies behind them and kind of takes advantage of the political makeup of Congress right now to lock in place some permanent protections for our public access rights to our public lands. And so that's like the broad categories of things we're focusing on, and each one of those has a lot of work to do.
You know, it's kind of insane that these people that are not elected officials have so much sway on our lives because you talk about all these different people that were maybe in positions of power with these federal lands, and they were these huge executives of these it makes me wonder what their end goal is when they're just trying to keep people off public land and they're trying to like create these huge swaths of wilderness area. Why do you think they're doing that? I mean, can you strongman their argument for our listeners and try to explain why they try to close everything down and why they try to have these wide swaths of places where no one can use the land? Like what is their reasoning for it? I mean, one of the things they'll say is, oh, like the public is going on there and ruining the land. Is that their only argument, or do they have some other argument that we could strongman?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And it kind of like, I don't want to just speak for everyone on the other side, but I can point to some common trends that I see.
Okay.
And so the first reason why they might be motivated to close things down is this really is kind of like a religion for them. That it's an anti-human religion that just thinks humans are inherently bad, and anything we do on the landscape is going to cause irreparable harm or damage to nature and the
Mm.
environment and everything in the biosphere and so anything they can do to limit human impact on a piece of land is going to be a net benefit to nature. And so that's like the roots of the wilderness movement, is really to just say we need areas where humans just aren't allowed to go. in any meaningful way. It's like
Unless, but they're okay if people walk onto it, right?
yes, you can
But
walk in, but like no mechanized, no
what about
development,
what
no
about horse?
permanent impairment.
What about
Uh,
horses? Do they allow if you want to go in on a horse?
Horses, they do kind of allow, but it's regulated.
Huh.
But nothing with motorized. They don't even let a bike on. It's because it's mechanized
A
and
pedal bike, they wouldn't let on.
a wheelchair. It has to be suitable for indoor use if you want to use it outdoors, according to the definition of disability access of the BLM's handbook. It's
Wow.
like they definitely it's like very anti-human and anything that can and if you're to say, well, and the purists of them would even say, you know what, we don't even care. People don't walk in. We don't want any people in there. We just want areas where it's just nature and not people. That'll be better for nature. And it's a belief. They believe it, they fight for it, they're entitled to it, but that's what motivates that. I think there's also movements where they want to prevent any sort of like industrialization or energy development or anything like that. And so there are movements where they do want to, I mean, the climate change crowd definitely wants to not drill any oil. They want to keep it in the ground. They want to prevent anything that would possibly get it out to where a consumer could use it. And that is like grown out to all forms of energy. Like these last monuments, the national monuments that Biden designated, the Chuckwalla Monument, I went down there and it's like they basically set aside flat desert as a national monument. Usually the monuments are like scenic viewscapes and landscapes or mountain ranges or just something where it's like, okay, there's scenery here. This is really just a flat desert on the side of the freeway.
Wow.
And it's because they want to build solar panels, solar farms out there. And so it's blocking solar. And there was the Satitla National Monument, which was up in Northern California, which was the last one he designated. And that's in an area with high potential for geothermal leasing. And so they want to block the geothermal leasing. And it's like, and so it's there is sort of this anti-development faction where they just don't want to see any permanent development. And then you get into the recreation wars of just which recreation user should be allowed to go where. And there are people who have strong opinions about that. I kind of believe that there's enough land out there for all of us to be there. Whatever you're doing out there isn't really hurting me if I'm just like a reasonable, tolerant human being. Um, and so I've never once been out on public land and encountered somebody else out there. And my first impulse was to be like, I need to do something to make sure that person can't be here anymore.
Yeah.
Whatever they're doing is offending me so badly
Yeah.
that I want to use the power of the government to cut off their access to whatever benefit they're getting from being there. It's weird to me that people even exist that think that way, but there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
And then I think there's higher levels of this where um, it's pretty widely known that the that foreign governments will try to manipulate the culture of the United States. I
Mhm.
mean, we learned about this like with what they were doing to manipulate Facebook and social media and all these things, and it's like they've learned they're never going to like come fight us toe to toe, military open war. It's just not going to go well for most countries on the planet to pick that fight with the United States. And so they have to, it has to all be done through called a gray zone competition where they're like undermining our economy and our ability to utilize natural resources. And so you look at all of these fights over where people are getting oil and gas and critical rare earth minerals and things. And it's like, if all you had to do was throw some money at an environmental group in America and that would cut off America from its sources of uranium, that's a smart move. You don't have to fire a single bullet, and all of a sudden you've disarmed a country from pretty powerful weapons and from pretty powerful energy sources. And so it's like it's hard to trace that back, but I do think there's a lot of foreign interference that tries to manipulate media narratives around natural resource issues. They're so critical to any form of geopolitics that to assume that our geopolitical positions and these environmentalist policies are all just happening as some vacuum that's isolated from that. That's nonsense. It's definitely coming into play, but that's sort of outside of the realm of what a group like BRC is going to get involved in. We're just pretty simple. We just want stuff left open for recreation. We find that when public lands are open for multiple use, that they tend to be more open for recreation too. Most of the best roads and trails out there were former mining roads or cattle ranch roads to access cattle ranching infrastructure and other things. So it's like anything that's not catastrophically destructive generally has been a good mix of public. And so it's so yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but I mean, I think that's where some of the motives come from. As far as like closing the roads, the wilderness definition in the law is that you have to have 5,000 contiguous acres without a road. And so they get so hung up on roads because it means you can't create congressionally designated wilderness if there's an abundance of roads in the area. It's just too impaired
Hmm.
if you have all those roads. And so that's why they do these travel plans where I call it wilderness laundering, where they close the roads to make land that was previously ineligible for wilderness consideration. They'll now claim, oh, it's got wilderness characteristics now because all the roads got closed and reclaimed. And so that's why they want to close roads, I think, is it just makes it possible to put in these restrictive designations.
That's why, I mean, that's fast. That was a fascinating answer. I wrote down several things. A couple things that you said that had never occurred to me. Number one was that also you didn't bash them. I love the fact that you didn't bash them. You didn't say these people are crazy people. You said it's almost like a religion to them and they believe it. That idea that this is that they're trying to keep us off of these lands as a religion, that really helped me to understand it because religion doesn't have to have like a you know any sort of logic behind it. It's just something that you believe. It's a belief system, and you're saying these people believe that we shouldn't be on the land, that there should be no human impact on these lands, and they're going to use any means necessary to try to keep us off. And I like that because it helps you to understand. Well, it helped me to get a better understanding of who we're kind of working against and maybe what some of their mindsets are. And then the other thing that just blew my mind was this idea of foreign actors, where you could have foreign governments that are basically, in a way, fighting against the US and weakening the United States by limiting our access to our own resources, get us to sit here and lock up certain areas so you can't drill for oil or you can't like dig for elements, for batteries, for uranium, for whatever. If you can lock up all these areas in like litigation and everything, you can make that country weaker. And that could be a possible other explanation for some of these things is a foreign actor. I had never even thought of that, Ben. Like that's
Yeah,
so fascinating to me.
it's hard to prove, but it's kind of obvious as day if you talk to anybody that works in like the intelligence community and like how these things really work. They'll just say, yeah, it's foreign influence operations happen all the time. And it's just part of how global politics work. And so whether or not it's true, just ask yourself if it adds up. Say, well, what are they locking up?
Yeah.
Who would this benefit outside of this country for the United States of America not to be accessing gold reserves or oil and
Yeah.
gas reserves or lithium reserves or uranium reserves or rare earth mineral? Like it makes us dependent on other countries.
Yeah.
And
You can't dismiss it. Like there's too much happening. There's whether there's smoke, there's definitely some fire. So whether or not that's what all of it is, that's a different story. But if you say some of it some of it probably is that. Some of it exactly what
yeah,
you're
I mean, it adds up. And if you look at how successful the environmental movement's been in the United States of America, it has been. I mean, we passed a lot of laws in the 1960s and 70s that have made it the protecting the environment has become a top priority. If you talk to some environmentalists, they probably disagree and say that there's still a lot of work to do, and people can debate that. But those laws were powerful. They passed them, and the United States has had a lot of environmental gains. I would argue all of our environmental gains in the United States of America and our territory have come at the expense of us just going and getting those resources in other countries that don't have those environmental regulations. And so we've had this whole, ever since those laws were put in place, globalization became a very big factor of how the American world order worked. And so we were getting tons of fertilizer and oil and gas and all kinds of things from Russia, and all that's been destabilized. We get a lot of rare earth minerals and manufactured goods from China, and like the shipping, like the whole global economy, the way it's networked together is it's kind of crazy. Like there's a book I read by Peter Zehan who talks about how this is all kind of going to unravel. and it is unraveling. It's like these like geopolitical strategists, they're not idiots, and even if their theories might be wrong or right, as you kind of watch them playing out before our eyes, that the global trading order is getting reshuffled, and whether Trump's doing it, like all of these talks of like tariffs and stuff this week, Biden doubled down on all of the Trump trade policy. They didn't brand it as aggressively as the Trump as Donald Trump does, but the Biden administration was very quick to use sanctions and economic warfare, and like that's been like the history of their foreign policy. Was they've definitely restricted trade with China. What's happened with Russia has been incredibly destabilizing to what it was before, and all of this is going to force us into a position of a lot of places where we got necessary critical resources to have a functioning modern economy that we've all grown used to will no longer be available to us. And the reason I'm even talking about this is because this is why I believe the environmental laws will expire. We'll replace them with something else because it will become impossible to maintain a modern standard of living if we, the United States of America, aren't willing to onshore those resources here, which is probably why we're talking about renegotiating relationships with the whole Western Hemisphere right now. It's
Yeah.
kind of wild. It's like I'm not an expert at any of that stuff. It's just I'm a average person trying to make sense of it and what it means for the thing I am an expert in, which is this land policy stuff in the West and our access to public land. But it's definitely a lot changing. And all the strategists predicted the 2020s would be a time of upheaval and political resets
Yeah.
of economic systems, political systems, everything. I think the public land system will have a reset.
Was the book the Peter Zehan book, was it the end of the world is just the beginning?
Yeah,
Is that the one? I read that one last year. It kind of freaked me out.
yeah,
I mean, it's good if you're in well, good is a relative term. But the US he thinks is going to come out better. He thinks that China is like they restricted their population. They restricted their population too much and they're going to be in decline and they're going to be too top heavy with an old
yeah,
demographic, and they've got too many old people and not enough young people in essence, right? And they're going to collapse on top of their own weight. Isn't that was one of his premises, right?
yeah. And that's a pretty standard argument with any geopolitical strategist because they're looking at demography, and demography is set in stone. Like it's you can't fix this. See, the only time you could have fixed a demographic problem was 20, 30, 40 years ago, and they didn't.
Yeah,
And
and
so now it's all got to play out. And
right.
that's happening to every Western nation, the least so the United States. And
Yeah,
that's mostly because of immigration.
yeah,
Uh, and so a lot of geopolitical strategists predicted that by the mid 2020s, we would be adopting immigration policies where we would be paying immigrants to come here. But those ones turned out to be wrong. Apparently, we're not
yeah,
doing that right now.
yeah,
But I think that again, not an expert in immigration policy, but it's been a very broken policy. The
yeah.
immigration has
Sure.
been very toxic. It's been a hard issue to solve, one regardless of what partisan side you fall on. That the systems again are all going to have to be reinvented, and hopefully we reinvent a system that is uh, more like immigration, like open immigration, not open, but like a policy where it's easier to come here. Like I think that what we've seen across the board
Make it easier to come here legally, right?
legally, yeah. And all of this is what I like everybody who's watching the first salvos of the Trump administration, what Elon Musk is doing, and they're going in and really hacking away at what I call the administrative state, the unelected
Department of Government
bureaucrats who,
Efficiency, right? The Doge thing,
yeah,
Elon Musk.
and And the administrative state is this extra constitutional creature where we've just put all this power in the executive branch that shouldn't be there. The lawmaking power basically doesn't exist in Congress anymore. It exists in this body. And they're the ones who write the law. They're the ones who enforce the law. They're not accountable to anybody. We challenge them in court, but your due process rights really depend on whether you participate in the administrative process correctly, which is why we're always like doing public comments and stuff at BRC, because if you don't do that and you don't do it correctly, you get disenfranchised from the judicial branch of government. So it's like all the other branches of government have been made irrelevant by the administrative state, and it's become this unaccountable, uncontrollable monster. And those don't last. And so
Yeah.
everybody who's like freaking out about what's happening, I've had people ask me, like, do you support this? I'm like, I don't know that I support this. I had 10 ways imagined in my head how the administrative state would go down in flames. And this was one of them. It was inevitable. It's going to happen. Maybe a Supreme Court was just going to hack away at it case after case after case, but it wasn't going to persist in its current form forever. We saw the cracks start to break during COVID when people realized who had the power, that there were these like agencies that could shut down a whole $30 trillion economy overnight, like with the flip of some switch that we didn't know even existed. And the CDC, like that's where that switch was to shut down the American economy. Like it was pretty wild. And so I think the American people have just like woken up to it. Like the all of the fuss around RFK. I mean, our food and medicine system is a disaster.
Yeah.
But that's because it's all a failure of the administrative state. The public land system is all the problems and the conflicts we have there. It's all because the administrative state is not able to actually live up to the like its lofty goals that it has for itself. And it's because it's a political monster. It's not
Yeah.
you can't have a thing that's like unaccountable to the people exist with legitimacy forever.
Yeah, and nothing gets done anymore except for executive orders. I wanted to talk about that because, like, so many things that have been happening since I've started paying attention, really paying attention to politics in the last 15, 20 years is executive orders. Like a president or an administration might get one piece of legislation passed in his 8-year term. And that's what they're remembered for. Everything else seems to be these executive orders that they sign. The problem with that is on day one, the next president comes in there and just abolishes it all and signs their executive orders. And so it's very frustrating to me because I'm like, yeah, the Trump administration is going to be more advantageous to us as public land, like OHV users. But if all of those are only just executive orders, then the very next person that goes in there gets to wipe that away immediately. That's really frustrating. And it seems like the only way to make any change is if you actually had legislation. But what you were saying earlier is that the legislative branch, they're getting less and less powerful because the executive branch is getting more and more powerful. Is that kind of what you were saying?
I did say essentially that, but I think I would clarify that
Okay, go for
the
it.
legislative branch is actually incredibly powerful.
But they don't do
In the
anything, right?
Constitution. In the Constitution, they were given the most significant powers because
Okay.
so the power to declare war, the power to spend the money,
But the
the
executive
like
branch has gone to war without even Congress's
yes,
approval.
of course,
So
and that's the problem. And so it's like the legislative branch has abdicated its power to the executive branch because the reason that the legislative branch got all that power was because they had a political check of the election.
it
People
was
could
supposed to be,
unelect them,
yeah, it was
which is
supposed to be big and
uncomfortable.
slow too, right?
Yeah, and but ultimately accountable to the people, and so that was the way that those most significant powers of government could be held in check was you always had to worry about getting reelected.
Yeah.
If you can move all of that dangerous power into people who are unelected, then you can just be there and they kind of still will like spend the money. And that's about all they do is pass some big omnibus spending bills once or twice a year. And that's like the bulk of the work of Congress right now. They don't legislate around meaningful issues. They don't, and it's not that they can't, they just won't until they get forced to. And so this last summer, you had the Supreme Court, they overturned something called the chevron deference, which was a legal doctrine which basically said these federal agencies, the executive branch, whatever they decide to do, as long as they had like a good reason for it, we're going to defer to them and their judgment if Congress wasn't clear on how they should do it. We'll just say whatever you, the agencies, come up with, we that can be the law.
Hmm.
And the Supreme Court now is saying that is no longer the case. If you don't have clear statutory authority from Congress to do this power, you don't have the power. And everything, probably 90% of the work we do at BRC, like the plans we work on at the Forest Service or the BLM or the Park Service or anywhere, is all built on a regulatory foundation that has almost no legislative foundation underneath it. It's just rule makings that these agencies have made not even like executive orders, but just like some secretary or undersecretary or field managers created a rule or a law or a policy or a plan or something, and they didn't have any statutory basis to do it, or what their statutory basis was is not clear. And the Supreme Court kind of left this now as like this open question of there's a lot of things happening out in the administrative state that we're going to have to review each of those as they come. And they didn't do like this blanket thing that says all these regulations are now gone. They basically said that whatever's on the books now can still work, but if people bring new challenges, there's this new precedent that we will be applying to them. And so, regardless of what happened in the elections, forget the election even happened. I've been telling people for since the summer that the most important litigation work that BRC will do in its history will happen in the next 5 years, because we have this moment where we're defining this post Chevron deference environment of what do these laws and regulations mean? Which ones are still valid and in effect and which ones are not? And you now have a situation where you have a Trump administration in office who every action they take, they will bait in hundreds of lawsuits from environmental groups and all the groups that want to close public land. And so the people who will be in court defining the post Chevron deference doctrines will be all the environmentalists challenging the Trump administration. And this, it's treacherous. That might all blow up in their faces. It very well could, because of how the Supreme Court's rethinking some of these things. But they're going to be actively in court defining these cases to say you do it, like high level litigation strategy of which cases do we bring and how do we weaken what this Chevron deference reversal means. And so you don't have other groups like us in there also arguing the other side of this. And whether you agree with us or not, you still want tension in all your political systems, whether it's the legislative branch or in the courts. You like good policy comes out of the tension of both sides. And so if it all becomes one-sided, we're going to end up with one-sided legal precedents. And so we're gearing up to, forget what's going on with the Congress or the executive branch. If we don't have Blue Ribbon Coalition fighting in court for the next 5 years, then it's a lot of these precedents we got will potentially be meaningless. The good news is we're ready to do that. We hired a full-time staff attorney last year. We're going to hire a second one here in the coming months. And so we're ready to probably take on anywhere from 5 to 10 cases a year. And because we participated in hundreds of actions that were completed by the previous administration, we have legal standing on like dozens and dozens of cases. We have our pick. And that took nobody could wake up today and say, you know what, I'm going to start a nonprofit and go change public land policy in the courts. You would be 10 years too late. If you weren't doing this for the last 4 or 5 years, you have no role to play at this point. We were the only organization doing it at the level we were doing it. And so for better or for worse, we're your only hope in making sure that the courts are where we can get some good work done. And we're going to do it. And so that's why we do need like the support of your listeners and others. And sorry, this was like long, but back to the Chevron deference. What that's done, though, is it has kind of created this situation now where if Congress isn't very clear in their laws, the courts are going to force them to be there. And so things are going to get struck down that they thought would work, and they won't work anymore. So Congress is going to have to kind of wake up and say, how do we legislate more effectively? Or else the policies they're actually trying to pass won't mean anything. And so that's kind of the hope we have. And like after Chevron deference was overturned, I did some videos about it, and I get people come and comment on the social media pages, and they're like, "Well, now the experts won't be able to weigh in. The Chevron deference made it so that the government would have to properly consider the information from experts, and that should be what guides our policy making." And it's like, people who believe that just like believe a total myth. Like if you've ever looked at one of these government plans, this isn't high-minded expertise coming to bear on a problem.
Yeah.
This is expertise being manipulated and weaponized to serve a political agenda. That's what it is in every case.
Yeah.
And so the expertise, I mean, it's not that expertise doesn't exist there, but to assume that it's not like totally subordinate to the political agenda means you don't understand how it works. And so like if you think that the experts have done a good job, it's like are Americans healthy and good? I mean, the experts have been running the FDA and HHS for years. Are Americans across the board healthy right now, or do we have like
We're fat, we're out of shape, we're
we're
dying of
eating
diabetes.
poison every day?
Yeah.
Like, and so the experts did a bang up job with our food and drug system. Let's keep them in charge. Like that was all happened during the era when chevron deference was in effect.
Mm.
And so it wasn't like the experts were actually ruling us. They never were. And so to assume that and expertise is value to a point. We do want that informing public policy. Why can't the experts work for Congress? Why do they have to work for the federal agency? They say, well, the Congress doesn't have the expertise to write these laws. Well, that's because they gave all the budget to the executive branch. They could give themselves budget. They control the money. They could have a whole staff at DC. Like they could fill the town of DC with experts that work for them, not the president. And then they could write good laws with informed by experts, and they can vote on them in committees and debate them in public and have all of the political pressure of the American people come to bear on the questions they're trying to ask, and they could like vote for stuff. They chose not to have expertise in Congress. It's not that Congress can't have access to expertise. And so Congress is like the worst funded agency in the whole government. And everyone still like complains that Congress members make too much money or whatever. And like that's a whole different problem. Like if you're going to have people make laws in your country, you want them to have access to good information and good talent and people who
Yeah.
understand those issues. It's okay for them to fund some budget to do that with themselves, but they instead said we're going to give this endless amount of trillions of dollars to these federal bureaucracies that grew with no check at all, other than the inflation rate. I mean, it's um, and so hopefully this isn't going to happen in a year or two or 10 or one presidency or two. This is like a paradigm shifting thing that's going to take probably 50 years to fully play out. But we're in the initial stages of it, which means it's an exciting time to be someone who's trying to influence policy in a time when everything's changing. And that's what we're trying to do with in our small little world here in the Blue Ribbon Coalition. But I think you're just going to see a lot of things change because of that.
Yeah, and that's a good segue into the grand reopening of our public lands. This is something that I saw you talking quite a bit about over the holidays. You did like a 12 days of Christmas email campaign
Mhm.
that came out. There's been a bunch of information, and then I look on your website and tell us what the grand reopening is. What is BRC's grand reopening of public lands?
Yeah, so I mean, we've kind of talked a little bit about it already with the courts. Like, I think that there's a lot of bad legal precedent that is making it the like the default position of the government to close stuff is because of legal precedents. I think all of those are going to get upended and overturned in the coming years as long as groups like us go and make that happen. It's not going to happen on its own, but the groundwork's all laid to where that could very easily happen if we go fight some good lawsuits. The next thing is we do have like this moment right now. You have a new administration in DC that seems to we've worked with them before. We know how the Trump administration operates. They'll have different players in, but the overall top line ideological agenda they want is they generally want stuff open. They don't want to over regulate the American people. If I don't think that most of the people that will get appointed and nominated by Trump in the Senate, like, if we go and say, hey, we want public lands open, we'll sit in that office and they'll be like, yeah, we do. What do you want open? What are your concerns? And the previous administration, it was like you just had to fight for every inch of trail and land and everything they were wanting to close. And so we've basically prepared a briefing book, my policy director and I, which is a two-page summary of the 350 actions that we've engaged in the last 3 years or so, 3 or 4 years. And so the Moab plan that closed 317 miles of trails, that's one action. The plan that closed all the trails in the San Rafael Swell, that's one out of 350. The Henry Mountain plan's one out of 350. So we have 350 actions that went through some federal agency somewhere in the United States. This is in every state that has public land. And some of them are good projects. Some of them are like ones where they were rebuilding trails or reconstructing new trails or doing fire mitigation treatments and things. And we actually supported like over half of those are just things we support and we want them to get done, but they won't sign and approve these decisions because they're worried they'll get sued by the environmental groups. For like the environmental groups actually sue the agencies if they want to remove salvage trees from a burn scar. Like it's crazy the lawsuits they'll file. And so we want to take up this collection of actions and just say, here are the things that did get done in the last 3, 4 years. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, but here's just an archive of all of these. Because if you go try and find these on like any agency's website, like nobody has aggregated these into one thing and then just said, here's our position on all of these. And we don't even care if they agree with our position or not. If they even will just address these projects on their own terms, what case by case, we can get a lot of public land reopened and better managed, actively managed. And so we see that as kind of a playbook that will be getting into the hands of policymakers. It'll just get, if you want something that's an easy win, approve the salvage tree project in the Deschutes National Forest in Oregon. It's easy, like it needs to be done. There's these trees that are creating a risk that, like you've been in a fire, a burn scar, they fall down across the trails. You have to have groups go in and clean them up, or somebody go and remove those off the road. If they're still standing, that's a safety risk for anybody going in there that a tree's going to fall on you. But there are environmental groups that think that forest burned, it should just go through a natural process. And they know that if the trees fall on the roads and we don't get them reopened, eventually the road reclaims. The Forest Service is like, we don't know where that road is anymore. We don't know how to map it. And then it's this whole big surveying problem of, well, to even rebuild that road, it's going to cost millions of dollars of government inefficiency to even just go reblade that road onto the ground. And so they know if they can delay those projects for years, that nature will reclaim that land after a fire and we'll lose a lot of that infrastructure that we had. And so there's a lot of projects like that that we think we can just drop on the lap of people in administration and say, you guys want to chalk up some wins, get some things done that really only just take some approval from the top. Here's a lot of good projects you can do. And then here's all the bad stuff they did. Here's everything they closed. And hopefully there will be ways they could find to reverse those. Um, when the Trump administration left office the last time around in 2021, we were in court with SUA over a plan called the San Rafael Desert. And SUA had challenged that plan.
Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, right?
Yeah, Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance. And so the Trump administration had approved a plan for the San Rafael Desert that would open, that opened a lot of roads out there. It was a pro OHV plan. And so the SUA sued them. And then that kind of like went, court takes time, you know. I mean, so that kind of sat in court for about a year. And then the election happened, Biden got in office. And then within a few months, the Biden administration announced a settlement with SUA, unbeknownst to us in the state of Utah that were defendant interveners on the case. They just told us one day, hey, this is over. They settled. And it's like, wait, you're not going to include us in those discussions? Like, that's kind of odd, a backdoor settlement. But that is something you can see. So we're currently active in a lot of legal challenges to some of the Biden closures, and it's possible you get settlement offers. I don't know. I mean, we're still going to fight them as hard as we can, but when administrations change, the priorities of how the government chooses to defend itself in court change. We expect some of that will probably happen. Who knows? Like we'll just have to wait and see what the lawyers end up doing. But um, all of that kind of has already changed overnight. You know, we haven't, no one's reached out, but it's like, you know, that the direction from the top is just 180 degrees the other way now. And so that's part of what we call the grand reopening, is getting that executive branch agencies to change course on what they were doing the last 4 years, have the general default position be, let's try and keep as much of this open as we can. And the stuff that did get completed, there's ways we have to undo that, and that's either in court through some sort of administrative action. Like there was a wind project in Idaho, the Lava Ridge Wind Project. One of the first executive orders Trump signed basically said the secretary needs to review this again. We're going to see if this, they're going to kill it through an administrative action, basically. And so that playbook could really be used on any plan that got signed by the previous administration, although it's still, you have all these like technicalities of administrative law, but it can be done. We expect there to be reversals of national monuments, like they'll reduce the boundaries or do something. I mean, the monuments was definitely a tool they used to lock up tens of millions of acres of land, and it's just really abusive. We've been in court challenging the abuse of the Antiquities Act for over a year now, and that's one where we think the administration will probably make some changes and and to your point, it's like this becomes a ping pong game where things just change back and forth and there's no permanency to any of it.
Mhm.
I don't think that'll last. I think what you're describing is a political system going through some pretty big transitions. Eventually, things will settle out, and I think Congress will kind of take back over its actual position of being the legislative body of our government. Because they're the ones who do have the power to make those ping pong matches permanent.
Yeah.
And so that leads to the other part of what I call the grand reopening is we really should go try and fight for some legislative changes. And so, what the first thing that comes to my mind is there's a bill called the Ending Presidential Overreach Over Public Lands Act that's been introduced and supported by a lot of folks out west in Congress. This would remove the power of a president to make a national monument designation under the Antiquities Act. It would make sure that power just is with Congress, not the president, because presidents are abusing it.
That'd be
Uh,
amazing.
and that's a permanent reform. Like that would take this ping pong match of this president expanded a monument, this president shrunk a monument. It would just say, now it's Congress. And if Congress does it, then it gets pretty permanent.
Yeah.
You have to get Congress to undo it. And that's harder. It's harder to change the consistency of Congress than it is to change who's in the White House. Um,
Yeah,
and
because we have
so
about 600 people in Congress between, between those two branches. And it's
in
supposed to be like that. It's supposed to be harder to get stuff
in
done.
50 different states and all have different political identities, and then you have the senators that are on six-year terms. It's like you can't like Congress is harder to change than the presidency around polarized political issues. Because if you flip the presidency on a partisan basis, then now there's a person on your side. Like it's Congress is a tougher animal, and that's why the permanent changes should come from Congress, not the president.
And there's a bill that is, what did you call that bill again? It was,
It's the ending presidential overreach over public lands or something like that. It's on our website. We have an action alert where people can contact their member of Congress to support this. The other one is Senator Lee and Senator Curtis and Representative Mike Kennedy introduced the Historic Roadways Protection Act. And this would basically defund the BLM. They wouldn't be able to use any of their money to enact these road closures that were passed by the previous administration. So Moab, Santa Fe Swell, Henry Mountain, like any of those that was about 2,000 miles of road closures between those three plants. And this bill would make it so that they can't implement those. And so that one is one we support just because it would provide immediate relief there, even though we're still going to fight for a reversal of those plans in court. The other bill that we worked with to Congress to get introduced is called the Outdoor Americans with Disabilities Act. This was another one that was introduced by Mike Lee. And what this does is require agencies to leave a certain target of route density open on public land so that Americans with disabilities can have access to public land. So it guarantees their access. It actually creates a right of access to public land that doesn't exist currently. And so that's a good bill. And it's something I hear all the time. Like I go around to all kinds of off-road events and groups and clubs, and every one of them, I have old couples come up to me that used to be super physically active. They just aged, they became 44 and aged into a disability or something. Uh, and no longer can do all the things they used to. So they get a side by side or they get a Jeep or they get something that gets them outdoors still, an e-bike. And they love it, and it's their way to still go recreate outdoors. And then you get an administration like we had last time, where they're just closing thousands of miles of road that really are lightly traveled, light impact, and you're telling these disabled Americans like you can't enjoy the benefits of this except for in these few hardened, curated places where we're allowing you to go anymore. No more exploration for you. It just is like really offensive to them, and they bring it up and say, "Hey, we're disabled, and now I can't go a place I used to go." And they're like, "Well, we don't see that as discriminatory," is the position of the government. And
wow.
so this bill would kind of require agencies to consider this and analyze it and take it into and actually meaningfully address it. And it gives them a quantifiable benchmark they have to reach so it's enforceable. And so this is a bill that we support strongly, and it would guarantee a baseline level of access across all multiple use public lands that currently could be taken away by whatever former employee of the Wilderness Society decides they want to run the BLM for 4 years and close it all down, which is what we have to run into these last 4 years. And so we want people to become advocates for legislative change because that's how we make these changes permanent and change the system to be working a little bit more directly in our favor instead of the whims of whoever's in the presidency. I do think the things the court are doing will also be a lot more permanent. I think you'll see the permanence come from Congress and the courts. Presidents are going to battle back and forth because they've all gotten so used to just abusing executive power. And but it can't last. Like at some point, both sides are going to get pretty exhausted by the exec governance by executive order and they'll rein it in. They have the power to, they're just choosing not to exercise it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it feels like whiplash, you know. I can think of like the Bears Ears Monument in Utah. There's been so many things where it's like they get bigger and they get smaller, and it is very frustrating. One of the things I was gonna, because there's so many different things that you're working with, and you talk about like 350 or something like that of these different issues. It's almost like you have a lot of irons in the fire. How do you decide where to allocate resources with Blue Ribbon? I mean, I know that you've just recently hired another attorney. How do you decide which battles are the ones? How do you do the triage of like what is, because you have limited resources. So what does that process
Yeah.
look like for you?
Um, we kind of look at how much does this affect access, right? And so if we get a forest plan and it's a vegetation treatment, which is just sort of like a smaller scale active management plan to take care of a forest, and it affects 12 miles of road, I mean, we'll engage on that. But it probably only takes us an hour or two to really get the coverage we need on that. If we're dealing with like a travel plan in San Rafael Swell that's 2,000 miles of highly popular trails, and like that one, we're actually going to go out in the field. We're going to research a lot of things. We're going to verify the claims. We're going to be building our legal argument for years in advance of it. We're not going to just wait for the plan to come out. Because if we don't get prepared for that, then we could end up losing a whole lot more. And so it really is just a matter of the scope of the things we're dealing with. And so, but generally, these are all spread out over time, and each action still takes, well, a lot of these aren't completed yet. They take years to complete. And so we can balance that out. And some of it is there's a lot of good local clubs we work with, and we just loop in with them, and they do a lot of the heavy lifting, and we just advise them and play the role we play. But we've had a lot of really successful initiatives in the last few years where we're working with dirt bike clubs in Idaho to block a plan in Grandview. Um, none of on the biggest ones of these, we're never working alone. Some of these smaller ones where it's like 12 miles of trail, there is a possibility we're the only ones tracking and commenting and participating in those. And and so I mean to answer your question, we balance it out based on scope. And if the scope it gets really big, we'll even reach out to our club and organizations that are members of Blue Ribbon Coalition and help them carry some of the load too. And a lot of good competent clubs out there that we work with. And so that helps us be a lot bigger than we as the core group of staff are.
Yeah. You talked about how the next 5 years, I kind of wrote down in my notes, the next 5 years is go time with everything that's kind of with the wheels that are in motion. Besides, listeners going and joining Blue Ribbon Coalition, what are some of the other things that we, as just like the general OHV users, dirt bikers, side-by-side users, what can we be doing to help you other than just, okay, I'm donating monthly or I have a yearly subscription? Like, what are the other things that you want us to be doing?
So when you become a member, I mean, we send you a newsletter every week. Every newsletter usually has some action you can take as a citizen, like an action alert where you can go comment on a plan with us or support a piece of legislation or do something that isn't money. Like we want people to feel like they're bought into the overall project of what we're trying to do. And so we do give a lot of activity on that. We want people, one thing we've noticed that the environmentalists tend to be really good at is controlling narratives around their work and getting people to believe that what they're doing is church. It is a religion. It's like they evangelize it.
Yeah.
And so we've invested a lot of time and effort into trying to be effective communicators around our ideals and our priorities. And so we have built pretty good social media followings, and they get a lot of good engagement, and that's enabled us to then put more resources into developing good content. And so we want people to follow us on social media and to like our stuff, to share it, to like, because that helps. The left has a pretty good monopoly on, or like the environmental groups. I don't like to say left or right. That was kind of like they're just very good at controlling media narratives. The side that wants to close all this stuff down. And so we can push back on that just by listening to the narratives that give us an alternative viewpoint. And so we want people to follow us on those accounts. And you don't have to always agree with us. It's great. Like, come argue with us. It's fine. Like, it helps us refine our ideas. Uh, but don't ignore it. Like, this stuff's all going to change a lot in the next few years. And if you sit it out, you could have maybe given valuable input into the ideas and things that are being put in place. And then the other, I mean, you mentioned it, but I would say just the donations actually are what make it possible for us. I've tried to work really hard in professionalizing this and making sure we're getting really good, competent people that are fighting this fight for us. When you and I first met, I was kind of doing this almost by myself, and now I have a good team that's growing, and that's just because good work invites more support, and then that support makes it possible to do more good work, and it just grows, and it's been growing organically. This year we have a ton of stuff we need to do. I could probably go to DC 4 or 5 times and have every trip be really productive. But we need to be able to fundraise and make sure we're covering the costs of that advocacy, that we're covering the cost of the lawyers. I said we're going to hire a second lawyer, and that is going to enable us to be in the court 5 to 10 cases this year. And so one of the ways one of the things we put together to fundraise for that is I actually kind of got this idea from you. Sweepstakes with some dirt bikes.
Mhm.
You're the best dirt bike sweepstakes guy in the world, I think. And so we found we got Rocky Mountain ATV MC to donate a Yamaha YZ250 and a T7, and they custom built them out with all kinds of customizations. And we're going to be giving each of those dirt bikes away to two different winners. I was going to give them both away to one winner, but you're the one who convinced me to do them to two separate winners.
Yeah.
So Kyle's fingerprints are all over this.
Yeah, we had a phone call and you said, "Hey, what would you do?" And I'm like, "Look, I've done a lot of these. I've given like 40 of these things away, and it's better to change two people's lives than one person's life." And I was like, "If you've got two machines, change two people's lives instead of one."
Yeah. And I took your advice. You won me over. That's what we did. So we have two awesome machines. I think you probably agree. I don't know if you're a Yamaha guy or not,
Oh,
but
they're amazing.
they'll change some lives, these two bikes, whoever wins them.
I've got the website up right now for any of you that are listening. It's blueribboncoalition.org/sweepstakes. And Rocky Mountain ATV is obviously a big sponsor of this thing. I love Rocky Mountain ATV. I'm an affiliate there, and I make no bones about it. Those guys are great. They are helping us to, well, I mean, they're a big sponsor. I know with Blue.
Yeah, and they've helped us and they've helped promote this. They've driven a lot of support to the
Yeah,
sweepstakes. And so we just want to give back, like give them the recognition they deserve. But if you've been on the fence about supporting BRC in the past, or if or if you have supported us and you want an incentive to do a little bit more,
yeah,
enter to win one of these dirt bikes. And it's doing well so far. It's like if you donate, you get more entries, and so it's a way to
yeah.
make your donation well, like you might win one of these dirt bikes, which would be awesome. We're looking forward to it. We're going to be drawing the winner in May. And if this is really successful, it'll just give us more of the resources we need to do some of this. I mean, we are aggressive this year. We had a great end of year fundraiser, but that's already allocated to some of this early first of year stuff we're planning to do. So that's covered. But in order for me to kind of keep it going, that's why I have this sweepstakes in place. Is so I mean, one thing you learn running a nonprofit is you kind of have to have these pipelines of support coming in. So this is the one we're running now. So if your audience, who I know is dirt bike enthusiasts heavy, want to support us, this is the coolest. It really is a cool way to support us. I'm super proud of what these prizes are. It was very generous of Rocky Mountain to donate them to us. And it's a way that we as a community can just all come together and support this work.
Yeah, and I love how Rocky Mountain ATV puts their money where their mouth is. These are expensive prizes. I mean, we're talking about this 2024 Yamaha 700 adventure bike with a bunch of cool things on it and cash valued at like 15 grand, and then the runner-up prize is a YZ 250 with a bunch of stuff on it. These are
Yeah, and the
huge
cash
amounts.
is to help cover like the registration, taxes,
Right.
delivery, all that. So it's like you win this prize, you're pretty much winning it, no cash out. No, like you're out nothing. You just have an awesome new dirt bike.
Yeah, yeah, I love that, and it's Rocky Mountain ATV is great. I can't say enough good about those guys. I buy stuff from them every day. I have two. I ordered two things from them yesterday, and they showed up today. So I mean, it's great. They have free shipping over like anything over like $75, and so basically every time I buy from them, it's free shipping, and now you can enter to win these bikes and support Blue Ribbon Coalition. Like this is a great thing. I'm so glad that you're doing it. And for everybody needs to go there. It's blueribboncoalition.org/sweepstakes. You donate to keep all this stuff going, and then you're going to have entries to win these two amazing motorcycles. I love it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thanks for the shout out and we're calling the sweepstakes the grand reopening sweepstakes. I mean, this is to help us with specifically with this project. There's so much work to do to make sure that the new administration takes action. I mean, one thing I like to point out is Trump's been in office. He signed hundreds of executive orders now. I the number of miles of trails that have been opened so far, and we're in early February, still zero.
Gosh.
It's
Yeah.
okay. Like we didn't
Uh,
expect this to be the top priority of day one, right? We
right.
knew
Right.
that. But none of this is self-executing. You have to have people on the ground that go and advocate it. They're sympathetic to it if we can get their ear. But if you don't have people like us going and kind of working the system to make that happen, it's not going to just happen on its own. We do need to come together as a community. We're planning to do it. We're going to do as much of it as we can relative to the level of support we get. And so we expect some big things. The next time we talk, that won't be zero. It'll be a lot more.
That's awesome.
But it's but there's a lot of work to do.
Hey, one thing I wanted to bring up is this film permits thing. So, can we talk a little bit about film permits, filming on public lands, like what some of the challenges have been, and maybe if you can give us a little bit of a history on how Blue Ribbon Coalition has been involved with that?
Yeah. So we actually got involved in it because of you. You were the one who called me, and you had been contacted by the Forest Service. They were threatening to force you to take down all your videos. They were threatening you with fines just because you had put a GoPro on a helmet and went and drove around on trails on public
Yeah,
land and you didn't get a commercial film permit. Then you put those on a YouTube channel, which is a commercial platform, and so all of a sudden you were in violation of federal film permitting laws.
yeah,
And when I heard that, I'm like, that's just crazy. There's no way they're going to just come after every social media content creator with this commercial film permitting thing that was designed for Hollywood studios.
yeah,
But they did. We started hearing it from more people. And so eventually there was a case that went through the DC Circuit Court on this, and the person that had been filming in the Gettysburg battlefield lost. I'm like, this is kind of crazy. They're actually just, we don't have First Amendment rights anymore, I guess. And I was explaining your situation to lawyers that we work with in a firm called Jones Day, and they're
mm,
one of the top constitutional law firms in the country. They do a lot of Supreme Court cases, and they're like, we really want to fight that on First Amendment grounds. We would think that the DC Circuit Court got that case wrong. And if we can get a split decision in a different circuit court, then this would be something we could take to the Supreme Court. And so we worked with you. We got some witness statements from you and others, and we went and challenged the film permitting guidelines in federal court. And as of last summer, we were able to secure an injunction, preliminary injunction in the district court in Idaho, which basically said if you're a member of Blue Ribbon Coalition, you don't have to follow the film permitting guidelines to go create individual content and put it on social media platforms. And so we were gearing up to kind of fight that through the court process after the injunction. But then one other thing that was also in play is that Congress had been debating a bill called the Explore Act, and in it, it had a provision that would update the film permitting guidelines on federal land to exempt individual content creators like small groups from having to get these film permits. And it wasn't clear if that would pass, and if it didn't, we'd still be aggressively fighting this in court. But that law was passed and signed by President Biden. at the end of his administration. And so there's new laws now governing film permitting. And you're no longer required to get a film permit to do most filming on public land if you're just a small level creator. You should read the act. I mean, there are still requirements if you're a bigger production and other things. There, how you can film on wilderness lands still is kind of a question mark for us. But it means that this new system is, well, I mean, we're still having discussions with the attorneys and the government to decide what if there's a path forward on the case. So I don't want to like disclose legally sensitive things, but for the most part, the pressure created by our case really created a lot of impetus for the agency to go and lobby for this law to get passed by Congress. And so this is a big win for Blue Ribbon Coalition. It's a big win for Kyle Brotherson, who had his First Amendment rights restored. Um, and it's like our bread and butter is fighting for trails and public lands to be open, but this was an interesting one because it was like about our constitutional rights, and we were a small part of protecting those and defining what those are and making sure that we're keeping all of our government branches of government checked within their powers, and so it was just a cool exercise to see the Constitution in action, and it was a great case, and it was because of a partnership with you, which is, and something I want to point out, you just contacted me as a member of BRC having a problem with the Public Land Agency, and we stood up and fought for you. And so that's also why we want people to be members, is it's our members who give us legal standing to fight these things in court.
Yeah. It's something I'll never forget because the day that I affectionately call him a tree cop, who worked with the Forest Service contacted me and was threatening me with $800,000 in fines and taking all these videos down and all this stuff. And he wouldn't put anything in writing, but when he would talk to me, the first couple times he talked to me, I took some notes. It was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying.
Yeah,
And
it would be.
and then first person I contacted was you guys, and I said, "Hey, this is happening to me." And immediately you wanted to get on a call, and there were a lot of legal calls that happened, and it happened over a period of years. But it was like I felt like I had an advocate. You were talking about, "Hey, we can get FOIA requests for this person. We're going," and there was a whole plan of action. And then obviously a lot of things kind of developed over time, but the end result was the First Amendment rights of all content creators are now more protected than they were. Can you share that? Because we talked on the phone like a month ago, and there was a story that you had where you were somewhere and you were filming something for BRC, and one of these,
Oh, it was.
person came up and said, "Hey, do you have a film permit for this?" Can you share that story?
Oh yeah, so it was Glen Canyon. I was talking to the superintendent and I said, "Hey, we're going out."
That's down at Lake Powell. For
I
the
had a
people who don't
meeting,
know.
yeah, and I was like, "Oh, we're gonna go out and do this thing. We're gonna make some videos out there." She's like, "Oh, you need a film permit for that." And I was like, "Well, actually, I don't." And she's like, "Oh yeah, you don't." Like, and it's because they'd gotten internal memorandum about the injunction that we'd received, and so I had to remind her of that. But yeah, it was like there was a time where she was saying, "Yeah, I needed it," and then she's like, "Actually, no, you're good. You don't
She's like,
need
"Oh,
it."
because you're Blue Ribbon Coalition, you don't need it." But now you said so. So just to recap, there was a preliminary injunction that if you were a member of Blue Ribbon Coalition, that you didn't need to abide by these rules that are made for Hollywood, right? So that was
Correct.
a preliminary thing that
And
happened.
that's kind of still in effect. It hasn't been rescinded yet, but it's been kind of this new law kind of like overrides it in some regards. Like, and so we would have to like come to an agreement with the court to no longer have that be in effect. But
Okay,
like the law that the injunction is protecting us from having to comply with has been
even better.
replaced by another law. And so it's like, and so like what it means, like I just think it's kind of the lawyers just need to sort out what it means now. And moving forward, it's like probably going to be some variation of the new laws. We'll see how these work. And if they
Yeah.
infringe on our First Amendment rights, we'll be right back in court challenging
Yeah,
them
yeah.
again.
Because what it looked like is you needed those film permitting laws were created so that Jerry Bruckheimer and these huge film companies couldn't come in and just bring hundreds of people into an area and ruin the land. It was written to protect the public land from that type of a thing where you have
Yeah.
these huge major multi-million dollar productions that are coming into these areas, and then the government was saying, well, just because you have a cell phone camera, you need to like comply with all of these same laws. And one of the arguments that that you had and that the lawyers we were working with was, well, then you're opening up a can of worms because every single citizen in the United States that has an Instagram account or has a YouTube account or a TikTok account or a Facebook account is now in violation of these laws as well. So it's like if you want to come after Kyle or this guy or that guy, you're coming after all of us because
Yeah, and that's
we're all uploading to these platforms: Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, whatever, and they're all being monetized. And even if the creator isn't monetizing it, YouTube is, Facebook is, Meta is. So money is being made, and so it was just like, this isn't sustainable, and it's a First Amendment issue.
yeah, and like really the government's default position on that should just be we're going to let the American people have their freedom. It'd be nice for the government to make some money from this, but that's not what the government's not there to make money off of my constitutionally protected rights. It's like a weird position to put itself into.
Yeah.
And then to have to regulate which speech doesn't need the permit, and it just was like if anybody's interested in this, it's like I was worth reading the brief. I think our lawyers did a great job, and it kind of just helps you think about how the government thinks about First Amendment rights. And but yeah, it was definitely one of the historic cases that I've been kind of proud to be a part of at PRC, but we think we're going to have a few more of those coming up. So we're looking forward to the how the legal system's working and playing our role in it. It's an important role.
I love that. It makes me happy to hear you say that, to hear the optimism in your voice. One final question that I had, and we can talk about anything else that you want, but like one question that I had as we were talking is, what is your why? So you're Ben, you're a 44-year-old good-looking dude with a little bit of gray in his beard. You play guitars. You've got the Fender shirt on, which I love.
Yeah.
You could be doing a lot of things. And I ask myself this, I'm like, well, what is my why? Why am I doing what I'm doing now? So that's what I'm asking you, Ben, is what is your why? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this work?
Yeah, so I will answer that. I do need to let you know I do need to jump off after this one. So let's get
Perfect.
this question answered, and then we'll wrap up. So I I've grown up in the West. I feel connected to these lands. My dad owned a helicopter company. I'd travel around all over, everywhere: Montana, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, Utah, and Arizona. Like we were all over the West going to these jobs, and you just get connected to the lands. You feel like they're a part of you. And as you go out and enjoy them and recreate, it just gets you away from all of modern life. I mean, we've become a culture that's become like addicted to screens and fake things. So to go out and experience something real, I think is something we really crave. I like playing guitar. It's kind of why I got back into it. I started like listening. You hear all this music that's being generated by AI, and it's just crap. If I wasn't fighting to protect land, I'd probably go fight to protect like real, authentic music because it's valuable. Like there's something real about it, and I just get a lot of benefit from it. It makes me happy as a person to go out and enjoy these places and see this beautiful earth that we live on and go explore. I like the adventure of it. Sometimes I go out in places and it's kind of a little you're dangerous, and these trails
Yeah.
are rugged. You get in these capable vehicles and you get out there and you see things that you'd otherwise never see. I think being willing to go take risks and go on adventures is an important part of being a successful human. I want that's something for my kids to learn is like you go take risks and sometimes it and I and that's just like totally antithetical to go to this spot, get a reservation in the system, and if you're gonna wait in line like Disneyland and hike up to Angel's Landing, and that every second of that experience is gonna be regulated for you, and then take the obligatory picture out and so like that's such a phony experience. Like it's way cooler to be like, I don't know what this trail is. I don't know where it goes. I'm going to go check it out. And then you go there and it's like just a whole new thing that not a very few people have seen. Like there's something really cool. I think humans have that desire to want to like go explore things and it makes us better people. There's reasons that this is fought for like mental health reasons and for health reasons in general. And we're blessed. We get to live in these beautiful places. We should be able to go out and enjoy them. I don't think we're hurting anything by letting humans go out there and get that benefit from this. That's where I just don't agree with the other religion, I guess. Uh,
Yeah.
but that's why. And it's like and so I sympathize with when other people feel connected to land and they want it managed a certain way. But my general position is I want you out there too. I don't want it just for me. And so I think if everybody had that idea, there'd be a lot less fighting about all of this. And so, but yeah, I don't know if that answers what you're looking for, but
That's
it
it. That's
definitely
it.
motivates me. It's just, I definitely, there's a lot of things I could go do, but this is what I like waking up every morning and going and fighting for, and I do it every day.
That's a damn good why, Ben. And I want to thank you for doing it. Like you've helped me in my little business. Blue Ribbon Coalition is doing great work. You're doing great work, and that's a perfect why. You know, like you didn't say I'm doing this because I just want to make a living at it. You believe it, and I think
Yeah.
I do believe that we need people like that on this side because there's a whole bunch of people on the other side that believe this other thing. So thank you for doing your work and thank you for that answer.
Yeah. And I would just add one more thing. I believe in good government. People say we're anti-government or anti-public land. It's like that's not true. It's like I'm actually like, working through every institution of government, the Congress, the court. Like I want good government, and I want to be an actor and a participant in making that happen. And maybe you disagree with me, but that's your right. That's how good government works, is that people work through the system to fight for what they want. And that's like separate from the land itself, but it's like I want a good system managing this stuff. And I feel like the system's broken and that's worth fixing because what we're fighting for is it's so valuable that experience that we all get to go have. And so that's the secondary goal is I do believe that we can that this experiment of the American government can always be improved. And if we're not actively trying to improve it, then it can get a lot worse. And so fighting for good government's also a good worthy goal, I think.
That's amazing. How do they contact you, Ben? What's the best way? Socials, website? What's the
Yeah, so we're on Blue Ribbon Coalition is our handle on just about everything. And then our website's blueribboncoalition.org. There's a contact link on there if you ever need to reach us. But Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, those are the ones where we're the most active. So love to see you out there.
awesome? Thanks for joining, Ben, and we'll chat with you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Kyle.
Okay. All right. Bye.